ask later. So it's an honor and a pleasure to introduce Carl Bergstrom from the University of Washington to be today's Marshak speaker. Carl received his bachelor's at Harvard, his PhD at Stanford, and has a diverse career centered around information in all of its wonderful ways. He's a broadly trained quantitative evolutionary biologist who's really as comfortable at home with game theory and thinking about networks as he is about thinking about scientific impact and reliability and COVID. He's also a prolific social media commentator. I would say I learned a lot during COVID reading his essays written in 140 characters, part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, and has been doing a lot of epidemiological work during the COVID epidemic. He's now on Blue Sky. I'm not on Blue Sky, so I have to figure out how to get on Blue Sky. Oh, I may come on over. He's a prolific writer and speaker. He has written a leading textbook on evolution, and he has written the must-read book, Calling Bullshit, which really teaches us how to evaluate information and evidence. I was looking online and noticed that he had put together sort of a short course on using AI and interpreting AI, and I haven't looked at that yet, but it looks really good. So today's talk addresses something he addresses a lot, which is humans, and it really is called The Crisis of Human Collective Decision-Making in a Social Media World. Please join me in welcoming Carl to be our Marshak speaker today.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming out. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here, and I guess I'll just go ahead and dive my best to make some sort of sense of everything that's happening, because there's an awful lot happening. Doesn't make an awful lot of sense to me, and I'll speculate a little bit about where we're headed as well. And the idea is not to give you a complete theory of what's happening, but rather just to provide one lens that might be useful for looking at it. And in particular, I want to explore how we as humans relate to our information environments, and how information environments that we interact in sort of shape our ability to make decisions as a society. So I'm going to start out by talking about sort of who we are as a species, then talk a bit about the web and social media, and then finish up by thinking about where we might be headed with AI and large language models and the likes of that. So who are we? Well, as a species, we're highly intelligent, highly social, ecological generalists. We make our living doing all kinds of different things in the world rather than just getting by banging our faces into a tree until we can make a big enough hole to get a grub, or filtering krill through our baleen. We explore the world around us. We figure out how we can extract the things we want from it. And that involves both, of course, the physical, natural world, but also our social worlds, right? We're constantly exploring and probing and trying to understand our social worlds and adjust our position within the social world. So what we do and what we have evolved to do is we've evolved to be information foragers. We've evolved to forage for information rather in the same way that a lot of creatures have evolved to forage for various foodstuffs. And we forage for information individually when we go and explore on our own. We forage for information collectively when we talk, when we teach, when we argue, when we negotiate. So we do all of these things, and we've evolved to do them very well. This is why our species is so ecologically successful, is our ability to forage for information that allows us to bring about the things that we want to bring about. So if we think of ourselves as a species of information foragers, what does that tell us? We can sort of think in terms of foraging theory, animal foraging theory. And here's an animal that's an information forager. What might we expect about this animal that's an information forager? Oh, it's off? Oh, sorry. Thank you for catching that. There we are. Okay, so we good now? I think so. Sorry, my apologies, especially to those watching. So what does it tell us? I mean, the first thing that we would expect of a species that's an information forager is we would expect it to crave information, and we do crave information. I mean, think about it. How does natural selection get you to do the things that increase your reproductive fitness? Eat when you're hungry, drink when you're thirsty, have sex more or less any chance that comes along. It makes them something that we desire. It makes them feel good, And we very much have the same sort of response to information, right? We desire information, we are curious about things, we get a certain set of dopamine and other rewards from having information revealed to us, from conjecturing something in our minds about, oh, maybe if I do this, this will happening, and then you get a sort of reward for being right, and a different sort of reward for being wrong, and so we have these reward systems built into information foraging. Now, there can also be too much of a good thing. So we have found ways, partly because we're so good at information foraging, we've found ways to take control over the environments that we live in almost every aspect of the environment. We inhabit a world of plenty, right? We inhabit a world currently where everything that we evolved to want is now hyperabundant in our society. So we evolved to want food and shelter and to not have diseases, and all of these things are hyperabundant. And we evolved to want information as well. And now we indeed swim in a sea of information. We've got these 24-hour nonstop tie-ins to the rest of the world that we use, and that's not enough because you might be on the bus or in an elevator or something. So we have a backup, right? That is the world that we've created for ourselves. We made the world this way. We made it on purpose. It's what we evolved to want. And the thing is there can be too much of a good thing, and we've seen this before in other ways. For example, with our food supplies, right? We evolved to want high calorie, high fat, high sugar, high salt foods. That shapes our tastes. We get control of the environment, and we're able to sort of figure out the economic distribution and everything else. We get junk food aisles, and we have the attendant health problems that come along with that. And we've done something very similar, I argue, to ourselves with our information environment as well. We wanted this continuous stream of information. We created it, and it's doing some bad things to us, right? Important thing to recognize, like there's these mismatches that arise as well. So we evolved to sort of forage for information in what I describe as naturalistic environments, small scale societies, natural outdoor spaces, that sort of thing. And we have these heuristics for heuristics like, oh, how do I know if something's true? Well, if two different people tell me the same observation and they don't seem to know each other, probably a good indication. All these, if A happens and then B happens, A probably caused B. These kinds of heuristics, and these heuristics work quite well in naturalistic environments, but that's not where we forage for information today. Today we're foraging in these complex digital environments that are completely different than anything that we evolved to explore. And worse yet, these digital environments have been explicitly designed using the largest psychology experiments in human history, of course, the online user data. They've been explicitly designed to exploit our foraging heuristics to keep us clicking. So we're now operating in these spaces that are essentially antagonistically designed to take advantage of the heuristics that we bring to them. And that has a big impact on both the amount of time we spend foraging and our behavior there, and also the kind of information that we get out. A really important thing to think about is how the ease of acquiring information shapes the way we use it. So this is the kind of core, beautiful result in foraging theory. Take this echidna that I met in Australia recently. This echidna makes a living by going to one termite mound, kind of snuffling all the termites out of that, and then wandering off and finding another termite mound and repeating the process. And so we can ask the question, well, you get to a termite mound, you start sniffing the termites out of it, and eventually, at first the termites are coming fast and furious, and eventually the termites start slowing down, and it might be time to go to a new mound. And so Chernov's marginal value theorem tells you when you should go to a new mound. And what you do, you sort of draw, this is the curve showing the slowdown, the rate at which the termites are coming in, and that's kind of slowing down. So here's the amount of intake, the termite intake. This is time going this way. What the creature wants to do is forage efficiently as possible, right? So it wants to maximize intake over time. It wants to be on the steepest slope it can here. Once it starts foraging, originally the ants come fast, later on they start to saturate. When should it go to a new patch? Well, it turns out it depends on how far the patches are apart. If the termite mounds are right next to each other, then you can just go a little bit away, until they start to slow down a tiny bit, go to the next one. If it's a long time shuffling around and exploring, then you need to go, this is going to be much further out. This asymptote is going to be further down the line. You're going to come much more close to exhausting that resource. So classic idea in foraging theory, right? And so basically, the longer the distance between patches, the more thoroughly you will exploit any particular patch before moving to the next one. Now, when I was in graduate school, I did most of my learning from books, and that involved, figuring out what I wanted to get, getting on my bike, biking to the library, asking somebody to go get them from the stacks. The person would go get them from the stacks, bring them back, I'd bike home, and then I'd have a stack of books, and it made perfect sense after all of that interpatch travel time to sit down and read through many of them in good detail over the weekend and then repeat, right? But when I was in graduate school, there was this marvelous invention, and it really is a marvelous invention, right? Well, this is the World Wide Web, and the whole point of the World Wide Web was to build a hypertext system to reduce travel time. So the documents on the web included in them links to other documents. So as I'm reading something, I don't just have a citation, which would mean I'd have to go back to the library and try to get that and so on. I've got a link that takes me with a click of a button right to that document, right? And that's built into the design of the World Wide Web. It is marvelous. Of course, we all use it every day. It's tremendous information technology, but it shortens that travel time dramatically. And because I'm always one click away from something else, I rarely get through a paper without diverting myself to another paper. I have 50 tabs open on my browser, and it's changing the way that I'm processing the information sources. Trying to read a book online, forget it, no chance. No chance at all. And of course, you take this to its natural evolution, and you get your bottomless feed of TikTok and 3 seconds to catch the user's attention and so on and so on. So it's sometimes easy to say, oh, kids these days, they're not good thinkers. They've got bad habits of mind, whatever. Well, no, they're just optimal foragers, just like we were. They're optimal foraging in a very different environment, right? And closely related to this, the balance of searching versus sorting depends on the frequency of opportunity, right? So our lives are, by design, characterized by multitasking, interruption, distraction. We were using these devices, but these devices themselves, often competing companies with competing products, have built-in ways to interrupt us and move our attention back and forth between different tasks that we might be doing. We have a massive overabundance of information coming in, and so an awful lot of what we're trying to do is sort rather than to process. So we spend so much more of our time filtering this incoming information stream and so much less time processing that incoming information stream. And that's a real fundamental change in the way that we are relating to information as a species that is a downstream consequence of this technology that we've created because we evolved to want it. And that's the sort of story we're telling. Our foraging behavior is also shaping the types of information that become available. Now, in animal foraging for seeds or something, and over a long-term evolutionary time might change the availability of the seeds or their nutrient value. But in the short term, the seeds aren't immediately changing in response to the animal. For us, it's really different. What we forage for out there is driving the market. The market's responding to what we're looking for, and so it's changing what information is available to us. And so in a world of scarcity where there's not a lot of information available, we might be really drawn to rich, thorough information. Think about a really well-done book. In a world of hyperabundance, not so much so. In a world of hyperabundance, we've got competing information streams that are all demanding our attention, right? So to get our attention, information has to be flashy. We've got so much else to do, so it has to promise that we can consume it quickly, or else we're just not even going to head down. No one has time for a, if something says 20-minute read, you're like, well, screw that, and you go on to the next thing in your news feed. And it has to trick us into thinking that it's urgent, so we're filtering. So we've got to, if we're going to pay attention to something, it's going to have to make us think, well, this is urgent. I need to pay attention to this now. Here's President Carter, leaving the Carter Center for the last time. Live breaking news, right? This has been scheduled for days in advance, and of course, what else was going to happen? But information tells us it's urgent. And then we adapt our information foraging behavior. This is particularly relevant to the last few weeks, to our certainty about the environment. So I have spent the last 6 weeks or so being profoundly unproductive. I've not been able to do the kind of level of work that I would like to do. And I've spent an awful lot of the time doom scrolling, reading what's going on, trying to make sense of the world. And I've been pretty mad at myself about that. Why am I doing that? And it's because the things that have happened in the world, in the last 6 weeks or so, have triggered what I call a crisis schema. And the crisis schema is quite a reasonable adaptive response, I think, to highly uncertain conditions. When we're confronted with events where I'm not saying we're Bayesians, but if you want to think about it as Bayesians, if you're confronted with events that had zero probability on your prior, you're in trouble. And you got to go back and figure out, you got to build up your model from scratch, right? So this is how we felt when the second plane hit the tower on 9/11. For those of an age that were watching that. We kicked into information gathering mode at that point because the world had changed unimaginably in a matter of minutes. Our current existing models were not sufficient. And so we focused on trying to acquire information so that we could rebuild those models from the ground up. And I think we're now grinding through the sort of, it's a longer term process, but we're grinding through the shock and awe of a, similarly cataclysmic set of events that are happening, especially for the science, technology, education areas of the country, but not exclusively. Of course, there are other places that are other people, other domains that are getting hit even harder. But I think this this notion of a crisis schema and the way that we adapt our drive for information to respond to the quality of the existing models that we have and how well events are fitting our existing models is really important to think about. So let's pause and take stock of what I've said so far. So we created this, we created this world that we wanted. And as a result, the environments that we forage for information in have changed radically. The ways that we forage have changed in response to those changes in the environment. And the scale of the networks through which we forage collectively, when we engage in collective sense making and collective teaching and collective discussion, collective argumentation, these networks have increased by orders of magnitude compared to what they would have been for most of our evolutionary history. So for most of our evolutionary history, we would have been in small, somewhat clustered groups like this. Go through the agricultural revolution, people can come together in slightly larger groups in small cities. You go through the digital revolution, and it is unavoidable. If you wake up in the morning, you have some thought like I did this morning, type it into Blue Sky, send it off, and by noon, 1 million people have read it. And that's a really, really different world than we've ever lived in before. The structure of these networks has changed as well. We have this sort of strong interconnectedness of the networks. We have small world structures. We have a massive inequality of influence. So we have a small number of people that everything they type into a computer will get read by 100 million people, and many, many people with much smaller influence. There was never a way for somebody to stand up and speak to 100 million people in human history before this technology. It, of course, happens every morning today online. The fidelity of transmission is completely different when we pass rumors through or thoughts or arguments through a chain of telephone, talking from one person to the next. That breaks down. They decay, they lose their persuasiveness, they sometimes they change. If I just reshare and reshare and reshare an argument, that argument holds in its exact initial form. We'll come back to why that's important later. So there's some big advantages to all of these changes in information technology. People can disseminate things faster, people can collaborate, we can capture these long tails of human interests so that people, the 6 people in the world who care about the, vintage Thomas the Tank Engine train sets can find each other and talk about them and share them, and it's wonderful. But there are also these risks as well, right? We hear about these echo chambers. We have very little understanding about the strategic vulnerabilities with respect to propaganda of a highly interconnected social world. We have these get richer dynamics that lead to these very long-tailed distributions of influence and so forth. And so, one of the things that we study at the Center for an Informed Public at the University of Washington that I'm co-founded with a number of colleagues are these kinds of rumor dynamics. This was a misinformation piece that was put out early during COVID, and it gets injected into the network. So this is the number of tweets, number of tweets liking the article. This is time, and over the course of just a couple of days, what happens is, it gets injected into the system, very, very small amounts of attention. Then some big names catch it, Brit Hume, Laura Ingraham, et cetera. They start sharing it. It takes off. It explodes, and then actually later is taken down as false and malicious by the web hoster. But that kind of dynamic, this is where this fidelity of transmission becomes really, really important, is that a rumor can spread like this at that kind of velocity without being diluted in a way that isn't possible in a non-digital world. And then, of course, there's the whole issue of algorithmic feedback. And so much of what we're seeing online, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Google, what we learn about the world is a consequence of algorithms. So we are deliberately choosing, because there's so much information out there, to offload our evolved sort of information foraging abilities onto these algorithms. But the problem is these algorithms largely aren't designed to maximize our understanding of the world or our well-being. They're designed to maximize the profits of the companies that are trying to keep us engaged. So we see things like the radicalizing effect of YouTube, and a game we used to play in our Calling Bullshit class before they kicked Alex Jones off of YouTube. We had a game called 6 Degrees of Alex Jones. So you start at any random video, and by clicking one of the suggested videos on the side, you get 6 clicks. And so Jevin and I could almost always get to an Alex Jones video by choosing the right clicks along the side. So the algorithms have concluded that, to keep people's attention, you feed them more incendiary, more radicalizing, more extreme content, and that's what gets recommended. We're also entrusting our social networks to algorithms, right? During COVID, I did a lot of my collaborations with people I'd never met and people I never would have met under normal circumstances, leading sabermetricians who were doing sports analysis for hockey teams, for example. And we don't really have much theory about that, but if you think about it this way, we know the people that we do, and these are some of the most important relationships in my life, because individually tailored algorithms trained on petabytes of data and optimized to keep me clicking wanted me to know them. And that's kind of disturbing to me, at least in the absence of any theory. And maybe these algorithms are better than running into random people at a kid's baseball game or in the hallway at work, but maybe not. There's the whole issue of social media as an outrage engine, right? So social media sort of is set up to try to what do people pay attention to? It's the incendiary stuff. It's the arguments. Here's Elon Musk trashing accounts you hate will cause our algorithms to show you more of those accounts as it's keying off your interactions. If you love trashing that account, you'll love trashing this one too. Not actually wrong, lol. Okay, so not actually wrong, which is pretty good for Elon Musk, but it's profoundly cynical on a platform that he runs. And why is it profoundly cynical? Well, that's a primary aim of foreign propaganda in the United States, is to create divisions and distrust and anger within society. Because if we can be convinced that half our fellow citizens are evil, irrational, or can't be reasoned with, we lose faith in democracy and we seek pure power, right? And so that's why after any kind of a crisis event in the US, for example, a mass shooting, we see enormous floods of social media from hostile foreign actors, social media activity on both sides. Lots of people saying, we should take away all the guns, like we never should have had guns, and we need to go door to door and take them all now. And then other people saying, I'll shoot anyone that tries to come to my door and take my gun. And the idea is to make people believe that half of the country is not reasonable and can't be reasoned with. And so social media is doing this because the algorithms are learning that that's what people pay attention to, not because it's trying to undercut the country. And so this brings me to sort of a key point, and this is kind of a key pivot in the talk. What's going on here is what I call the iron law of information technology. And the way that information technologies seem to work, or have seemed to work for a long time, is we start out with some business model that we end up settling upon. We settled upon, largely without discussing or thinking about it, the business model that the World Wide Web would be provided free and monetized off ads. And that drives the affordances in the user experience of these platforms. The need to sell ads drives the structures, the way that we interact with the platforms, the way that the platforms interact with us. And these affordances in user experience then end up driving the type, quality, and value of information that is conveyed through this. So we have not, with information technology, tended to start here, thinking about what do we want, thinking about what affordances in UX could support that, what business model would it take to make that sustainable. And in this case, in the web case, right, the real thing is it was monetized attention. That was the business model, was just an all for all contest for attention, because that correlates with selling ads, and we can see some of the consequences. Give you kind of a case study of where, one example of sort of what happened in this sort of domain. And this was the COVID pandemic, right? As a infectious disease epidemiologist, this was not a surprise that we had a pandemic. I didn't know what year it was going to be. I did not know it was going to be a coronavirus, but clearly this was going to happen. I'd been worrying about it for 15 years. So we got our COVID-19 pandemic, upended everyone's lives. Everyone had to become an epidemiologist to try to make sense of the world, right? And I remember like going to grocery stores and hearing people talking about R-naughts and immunity thresholds, and turning around expecting to see one of my friends, and it's just every rando in the store. We all had to become immunologists, epidemiologists. How do we do that? Well, we relied on social and traditional media. We collectively information foraged, right? Should have been science's moment in the sun. Instead, a large fraction of the population ended up losing trust in science. Science came under attack. And while in 2006, when I helped design a pandemic plan for the US under Cheney, we had plans to actually use the National Guard to protect the vaccine trucks so that people didn't hijack the vaccine trucks to vaccinate their own kids. Instead, we couldn't get the majority of the country to get vaccinated. So, wow, what happened, right? Well, some of what happened, we had enormous scientific uncertainty around an entirely new virus and a public desperate for answers. So there are all these questions. You can just remember wondering about all these things early in the pandemic. We didn't know the answers to any of these things. We couldn't have known the answers to any of these things because the virus had only been in humans for a few months. And so there was no way for responsible experts to provide any of this. But we were sitting on this information ecosystem that was designed to meet demand, not to provide quality information, right? And so the result was what I call an uncertainty vacuum, where every manner of nonsense goes flowing into this uncertainty vacuum. The responsible experts will not say, oh, the mortality rate is, the case mortality rate is 0.05%, because they don't know. But irresponsible people are happy to say it's 0.001%, it's less bad than the cold, or it's 10%, it's going to kill us all. And that comes flooding in, and the same with every other aspect of the pandemic. People wanted information. We're all sitting on this information fire hose, but the good information, there was no good information to come through it. People end up unsure about who to trust. Science in the making is exposed for the first time, separate talk, but we teach science using science textbooks, showing this finished stuff. All of a sudden, people are watching science in the making, very, very publicly visible and exposed, because we're doing it all on Twitter, we're doing it all on preprints, we're doing it in places that are available. People are feeling like, hey, look, all the science books are all like so sure and definitive and all of that. And now for the first time in my life, I actually need these scientists, and they're a bunch of idiots. They can't agree on anything, and worse yet, they're battling like regular human beings. And that was profoundly discouraging for people. Of course, it's also manipulated for political gain. Of course, there's going to be a spectrum of opinions in any active scientific discussion where we don't yet have scientific consensus. People would cherry pick those and so forth. And so as a result, more information wasn't a better way to understand the world. That was advice I gave very early on, was stop doom scrolling about this. Pick one or two reporters you trust. And, if if they're whatever, whoever they are, pick one or two reporters you trust, read, move on. Anything else you get, this is the crisis schema again, but a pandemic unfolds in slow motion. Information that's an hour, 1 hour or more recent isn't helpful because everything's happening so slowly. There's so many uncertainties. What's helpful is quality information. And what happened, these systems just open us up for massive amounts of misinformation. So people end up following poor sources. Other people just give up. They say there's no possibility of understanding what's going on. Even the scientists don't understand. This is hopeless. And we inadvertently, through these devices, delivered to ourselves the current mode of propaganda known as the falsehood fire hose. And this is something that Russia developed in Ukraine over the last 10 years, really. And so here's Gary Kasparov explaining the point of modern propaganda isn't only to misinform or push an agenda, it's to exhaust your critical thinking to annihilate truth. And so the idea of the falsehood fire hose is to push so much mutually contradictory material out on a population, not to trick them into believing one particular wrong thing, but make them believe that there is no possibility of understanding anything, and creating a sort of sense of helplessness and nihilism. And I think our systems ended up doing that to us during COVID. So last pivot. Now let's talk about generative AI. So I've talked a bit about structure of the web, talked a bit of who we are as information foragers. Let's look at generative AI. So we've got this world that's addicted to online information technologies by design. That's where we are, right? Now we've got this technology that can create information without much allegiance to truth, but can create information very, very cheaply, very, very fast, customized to say anything you want to anyone you want in the jargon or inside language or whatever of anyone you want. Adoption of these technologies is lightning fast because you don't need to buy a new device to consume generative AI content. It's pushed to you on the devices you already have. We don't have to wait for people to get iPhones. We don't have to wait for people to join Twitter or any other platform because it's pushed across all the platforms. And critically, you don't even have to want it. In fact, most people don't. It's being foisted on us by all of these companies. Here I did a Google search for Google Gemini how to. And the two of the top three are how to turn off, how to disable, and then we have how to remove down here. These are the automated search results that you get under AI, the sort of AI overview you get under a Google search. So people don't want it. And then Copilot is the sort of AI assistant that's built into Word. So I thought, well, I'd ask Bing about that since it was Microsoft's product. So I Bing Microsoft Copilot how to disable, how to delete, uninstall, turn off, remove. So these systems are being pushed on. Another reason the adoption is going to be so fast is they're being pushed on us everywhere, even though it's pretty clear that a lot of people don't want them. And this comes back to the iron law again. So business model driving the affordances in UX, driving the information quality, type, and rate. What's the business model in this case? It's partly market share, but it's mostly training data. So the reason that generative AI is so effective is because of this reinforcement learning with human feedback, this process that used to have to be done using exploitative labor practices in Kenya, having people have conversations with the AI and tell the AI when it was giving good answers or bad answers. Now that's largely gotten offloaded onto the process of all of us. Every time we use an AI embedded system, you use Google Gemini, if you read the Google summary, the AI summary, and are happy and go away and ask something else, then that tells them something. If instead you scroll down and click on one of the answers, that tells them something different. If you're using ChatGPT and you ask a question and then it answers it, and then sometimes, because they trick us into thinking they're human. Like sometimes you even say, "Thank you, that was a good answer." I catch myself doing that. But even if you don't do that, if you're satisfied and move on, they know that. If instead you say, "No, I wanted," you're training the system, right? And so what's key for all of the major players, whoever gets the big advantage, whoever gets a big head start in this space is going to be able to corner the space because they're going to have all the training data. This is why Bing will never catch up to Google, is because it's not that engineers at Microsoft are stupider or something. It's that Bing is running on 20th or less of the training data than Google because they don't have the active users coming in to provide that information. So this is why this seems to be driving, so people believe, first of all, people believe there's an enormous amount of money that is going to be made by whoever wins the AI race, or they believe that, at least they want to keep acting like they believe that until they can sell or whatever. But whoever wins this race needs all the training data. And so, I was initially very, very puzzled when Google took a remarkable search engine that was unquestionably dominant in the market, like we couldn't imagine, and replaced its very good results with things like this. How many US presidents graduated from the University of Washington? 4. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Monroe, and John Tyler. John Tyler was alive for 90 days after the founding of the University of Washington, so I can't actually rule that out. But the others, I guarantee you, never attended, in any way, shape, or form. So why did Google do this? Was because ChatGPT was getting all the training data. They desperately had to get this out there to start getting training data because that's much, much cheaper if you can give you can learn something from every single Google query, right? So that's what's part of why this is getting pushed on us. And why they're so dangerous, and what I want to think about, in a broader scheme, and I want to think about what they do to our network structure and the way we understand each other and the world that we live in and all of that. Primarily, I think of LLMs as interposing themselves between authors and readers. We're the readers. LLMs are not authors of anything, right? They're statistical machines that are remixing text that originally had been written by some kind of author. They're coming in the middle. Let's just take a minute and just think about network structure, and let's envision a world, and maybe we won't end up here, but let's envision a world where these dreams of AI, search, ubiquitous AI and everything are seen through, and we allow LLMs to be our intermediaries in information foraging. I'm no longer going to read social media myself. I'm going to have an LLM summarize. I'm certainly not going to read in the newspaper. I'll have a custom LLM summarize it, given what I care about and knowing what I know, and so forth. So what happens? So first of all, and I'm just using the scaled down network because you don't want to look at the big hairball. But first of all, the scale of the network changes, right? Right now on a social media, we're clustered into little groups. We may have sort of diverse opinions that are loosely clustered together. People that think one thing mostly talk, and people think another thing mostly talk. And this can actually be quite important for maintaining epistemic diversity in a community, which people like Kevin Zollman have shown is very, very important in, for example, accelerating scientific discovery. So, so we have a network like that. Now we come in and we switch to a network where we all talk to an LLM, and it's sort of the LLMs are these central hubs. We get all our information back and forth through the LLMs. Really different structure, may have different consequences on the persistence of epistemic diversity because you lose some of this clustering. But also remember that these LLMs take large amounts of text that's out there and they sort of aggregate it and homogenize it, right? What are they doing? They're giving me the most predictable, the most likely answers to queries, the most likely responses to conversations, drawn across a very, very broad input corpus. So you can imagine these LLMs as kind of taking an average over a lot of the stuff that's out here and sort of feeding that average back out to each of us as we're the stuff this is part of why the prose and the text you get from LLMs is it's anodyne. It's the Thomas Kincaid of text. It's so. But if the LLMs start doing that and we're their intermediaries, then of course there are intermediaries, and of course we're going to follow. They're going to affect our opinions, and so we're going to lose epistemic diversity out here, not only because it changes the structure of the network, but because the central engine that's communicating with all of us is giving us this averaged, watered down view. And in fact, we've already seen this kind of stuff. This is work Jevin West did. We've already seen this kind of thing with Google Scholar. What he found is that the release of Google Scholar has had a remarkable impact on on reducing the diversity of things that people cite beyond their fields. Within their fields, people know well enough what's going on, but the things that people cite when you're writing interdisciplinary things and you're saying, oh yeah, and in this field they do this, the diversity of that has crashed subsequent to Google Scholar. And so we're having kind of that consequence of centralization. But then think back to the profit model associated with putting content on the web in the first place, right? It's monetized by ads, monetized by attention. If nobody visits the web pages out in the periphery and everyone just gets summaries of them from the LLMs, people lose any incentive to keep putting that content out there. They're not getting the web traffic anymore. Meanwhile, it becomes very, very cheap to create AI slop garbage to put out there, and you get all these AI websites that try to do this. I don't know if you've tried this recently, but if you look for lecture notes on subjects, it used to be you just get, you'd get the MIT set of lecture notes and the UCLA set of lecture notes and whatever. Now you get those, but an awful lot of what you get will be very slickly produced websites with very slick looking lecture notes that have been, you have a company that's written 2,000 lecture note sets using AI, put it behind a decent web interface, and it doesn't look like it was written by a CS professor, the web interface doesn't. I mean, and so that sort of is, you got this bad information driving out the good. So it's simultaneously people lose the incentive to put up good information. It becomes very, very cheap to put up bad information. Now we've got all this AI slop out there. We're learning from the AI slop, and we also ultimately sort of, end up ingesting that kind of material. So we go to this very, this is just one possible nightmare. It's not guaranteed to happen, but we go from this, very rich online world with a lot of content and diversity to a very impoverished online world that's basically, regurgitated AI slop fed on itself over and over again. And that's really scary to me. I'm going to conclude with a few other thoughts about AI and democracy, and then we can go and discuss some of this, which will be the most interesting part, I think. Obviously there's this Jeffersonian sentiment, right? Here's Thomas Jefferson. Wherever people are well informed, they can be trusted with their own government. So the basic idea, to have a functioning government, you need an informed electorate. And large language models, I mean, I've been worried about this for many years. I've been worried about the sort of misinformation, spent a long time studying that. I've been worried about propaganda. I've been worried about sort of lack of reasoning abilities and sort of social media awareness and all of that. Large language models make it even easier to misinform people. You can create these large-scale campaigns very, very easily. You spin up, whole misinformation ecosystems. You spin up the primary sources that don't actually exist, create faces for them. You have writers who don't exist write the stories about this. You have commenters who don't exist adding comments, and you post all of this, and it looks like a real media ecosystem. And you have people who don't exist tweeting about it, and so you can spin all of that up for a few $100s instead of requiring a entire building devoted to this, and sort of cyber propaganda outfits had. You can micro-target with all the enormous amounts of information that we have available through information brokers. You can micro-target your messages, and you can then fine-tune the micro-targeted messages to each particular individual, right? So you know something about an individual, a ton about an individual. You can buy that from any of these data brokers, feed that as an input into the LLM, say, write an argument for a person with these demographics for why they should vote for this candidate or purchase this product or whatever it is, right? You can create enormous volumes of fake content of all types and attack with falsehood fire hose, right? You can just create massive volume of fake comments on social media sites, fake news stories, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be, of course, text either. We can do fake video, we can do fake audio, we can do fake images, all of that kind of thing. And this, I think, is disastrous, potentially existentially disastrous, because I think that without universal access to good information, we fail as collective information foragers. We don't manage to use our networks to figure out what the world is like and what we need to do about it. And so if people don't have good information, I don't see how we can possibly deal with things like climate change, risks to food security, extinction, emerging diseases, election tampering, vaccine refusal, violent extremism, racism, war. I think we're in very, very big trouble without that. Large language models are also very, very useful in attacking a core weakness of a government like ours. We're a representative democracy. We have people that represent our opinions in the government, and to do that well, they need to know what we think. So in 2017, when they were thinking of repealing net neutrality, there were about 22 million comments were received from Americans about this. The vast majority of those were in favor of repealing net neutrality, which surprised almost all observers. It took several years of investigation, but it turned out that about 18 million of those were actually fake. So they were sent from bots by people using people's names, but they weren't sent by the people. It was fairly easy to track down at this time because it was like the same message was sent 10,000 times in 3 seconds, and so like that wasn't so hard to spot. It's not going to be that kind of crude stuff anymore, right? Now, again, I can feed people census, I can feed an LLM census level data, say, okay, go through this grid of census level data, and I want you to write for each of these descriptors, I want you to write a letter about how that person feels about abandoning Ukraine, say. And so if this is who the person is, why would that person think we should abandon Ukraine? And then I can write that. I can, of course, do thousands of these an hour. And then I can couple them with photos, if I need to, of people that don't exist. I can have someone call using a voice that doesn't exist, synthesized with fake parameters. I can have someone call and leave a message on an answering machine. I can use data brokers to get the names and demographics of the people who are supposedly doing the calling and leaving the messages on the answering machines. And I can match ages and genders and all these things in the characteristics of the voice. This is a man-in-the-middle attack on democracy because our representatives, unless we're speaking to them face to face, don't really know whether they're speaking to a real person or to a model. And I think this is tremendously dangerous. I haven't heard nearly enough talk about this. But I mean, I think that's one. I mean, I've been saying since this FTC thing for 8 years that this is going to be a real reckoning for us. And I'm very worried about that. Large language models undermine anonymity because for a very long time, one of the real powerful things about the internet has been the fact that it allowed a new kind of anonymity. And we could, talk with relative security and relative privacy with other people. So you could have dissidents organizing, you'd have persecuted people sharing their stories, you could have teens, LGBTQ teens in the rural South finding each other and talking. All of these things could happen. And that was very, very powerful. And the reason it could happen is because you didn't know who you were talking to, but you were pretty damn sure you were talking to somebody. And that's no longer the case, right? So at this point, we can comment lists, we can mass flood, paper submissions, anything like that. And if we allow anonymity there, then we don't even know that the stories we're hearing are actually people's stories at all. And so this worries me that we may end up losing one of the really nice things that we had through internet technology of allowing anonymous communication when useful, where that it is useful could be flooded out with masses of mass-produced data. A fight to democracy is transparent decision-making, and understanding why governments are making certain decisions, having people that are accountable for those particular decisions, having people that are required to explain why those decisions were made. Toward more and more AI-based decision-making, which, as you know, is very much the move in the federal government right now, we move away from that kind of transparency toward the radical opacity of decision-making. Why did you deny this claim? Why did you institute this mandate? Well, the LLM said so. And that's not any kind of explanation. That's not a democratic decision. That's not a government being accountable to the people. And then there's this concentration of power. And maybe DeepSeek will change this a little bit, but because of the enormous computational costs involved in training one of these models, only entities in the world that could train these large language models are a very, very small number of very, very well-funded been in talks with NSF about should they make their own. And even before any of the cuts, NSF simply couldn't afford to train up a large language model on the scale of any of the commercially available ones. It was way beyond the budget. So even the major science funder on the important thing in the biggest, richest country in the world can't do that. And so that means if there's power in being able to select trained, and in particularly in the human in the reinforcement learning with human feedback aspects and so forth, and there most definitely is power there. That power is being concentrated in a very small number of hands in a very anti-democratic way. So yeah, so then I want to just kind of come back with kind of one more kind of picture about where we could head with all of this. And this is the risk of sort of personalized AI. So another grail of the AI development company is to not only have AIs being our intermediaries between ourselves, but having be personalized and tailored to us. So the rosy version of this is, well, they know what your interests are, they know what you understand and what you don't, they know how you like to be told things, they know your learning styles, and they'll go out and they'll be your information concierges. And all of the major AI platforms are developing these. So this is sort of a dream of these companies. But if something like that happens, think about what that does, sort of epistemic grounding as a whole. Right now, we already worry a lot about filter bubbles. I see one set of news, other people see other sets of news, and we don't kind of agree on what's going on. If we were to fully take on these individualized concierges that learn oh, Carl's political biases are this, but that, they'll just tell me what I want to know, and different, and they're telling you what you want to know, and every single one of us is going to be living in an information world that has been custom for us. We already know from the way that the training works that LLMs don't like to argue with us. They like to tell us what we want to hear, tell us we're right when we say things, and every single one of us would be living in our own false information bubble, and there would be absolutely no common epistemic ground for a society. And again, under those conditions, you simply can't have a democracy at all. So what do we do to regain control? A couple things I'm not optimistic about. I don't think we can use technology. I think it got us into this mess. People talk about using technology to find misinformation or whatever. I'm not optimistic. I thought regulation was a reasonable idea until about 6 weeks ago. And so I'm putting all of my chips these days on a couple of things. One's on education. And we created this first course in 2016 about data reasoning that sort of went viral. It's taught all over the world. We wrote books about it, et cetera. And then what I wanted to tell you about now is released 2 weeks ago. This one's not a book. It's fully verse. It's all kind of supposed to be pretty and look like those nice scrolling New York Times things where the text scrolls over the pictures and all that. Go straight to it, or it's just the bullshit machines. And the idea with this course is we tried to build the course that we think every college freshman should take about how to thrive in a world with AI, because they're going to have to learn in an AI world. They're going to have to learn to work in an AI world. They're going to have to learn to be human in an AI world. And so, we view it as a course in the humanities, not a course in, computer science or anything, because it's about how to be human in such a world. It's a course about how to live and thrive in that sort of world. So we're trying to do the education piece. Obviously, it's not going to solve everything, but I think people helps. I believe in educating people. And then finally, there's this notion of stewardship of our information technologies. And this is where a lot of my work is going these days. I've got a research scientist who's just finished writing a big report about effective information tech societies. And we're going to be doing a big project on this for the next 2 years. The idea with stewardship, it kind of comes out of this paper we wrote a few years ago. Joe Buck-Coleman is the lead author. Stewardship of global collective behavior. So what's stewardship? And we were talking about problems of decision-making that were brought on by social media and other information technologies. Stewardship's not censorship. It's not someone like looking at the information out there and being like, no, that's false, cross it out, right? Stewardship means thinking about the ways that these platforms affect how groups make decisions. How does the network structure, how does the network scale affect the decision-making
of a group? How does changing the fidelity of things work? What are the algorithms doing, right? It's turning this iron law on its head. It's starting with what we want these systems to provide for us, and then thinking about, well, then how do we have business models that might be sustainable for that? And so I think that human collective behavior desperately needs to become a crisis discipline. How do humans understand the world in groups and make decisions based on that understanding? Crisis discipline, right? It's an applied analog to a basic science field. It's ecology, it's climate change to earth science. It's always dealing with a rapidly degrading system, or a system that's becoming deregulated. We don't have a complete description of the system's design is going wrong in this ecosystem. We don't have full theory or description. And one thing we could do is we could say, well, let's just keep studying and not do anything yet. But if you do that, whatever was there is gone. And I think the same thing is holding for our democracy, is that we have a crisis discipline. We could try to get all the theory in place in 30 years, but that might be too late. I think we have to start thinking about what is it that how can we understand changes in the way that people are communicating and understanding the world, and what can we do to modify things we want? This is this sort of radical transdisciplinary project that's going to involve all of these areas. I don't need to read them. You'll see yourself there, and if you don't, ran out of room in the slide. The point being collective intelligence that have been fashioned by millions of years of adaptive evolution. We've got these systems of exchange and collect by millennia of cultural evolution. Now they've been upended twice in the span of 2 decades. First, the sort of internet revolution, social media, all that, and now, on top of all that, with us addicted to all that, bringing large language models online that can do, and other social media that can do so many things. And so what happens next, I think that's up to us. That's why I'm here talking. That's why I'm all so glad that you're here listening, and hopefully some people will help find the answers. So thank you very much for your time.